Hi, everyone, and welcome back to the Westferry Times. Today, we're doing a deep dive into a story that, well, it really stirred things up in Scotland's literary world. We're talking about Glasgow's I Write Festival. We've got, articles, reports, statements from organizers, notes on the public reaction, quite a stack of sources. Our mission really is to unpack its journey, the shock cancellation, the amazing comeback, and figure out what its return actually means for the cultural scene there. And to help us navigate all this, I'm joined by a fantastic guest, someone who really understands literature and culture and has been following this whole saga closely. It's brilliant to have you here.
Thanks for having me. Yeah, it's a really interesting story, this one. A fascinating look at how much we value, or maybe sometimes don't value, these cultural hubs until they're threatened. Keen to get into the details from the sources.
Definitely. So maybe let's start right at the beginning, just for anyone who might not be familiar. What exactly is I Write? Why is it such a big deal?
Right. Well, I Write is basically Glasgow's main premier book festival. It kicked off back in 2005. And it really grew into, well, the sources call it a cornerstone of Scotland's literary scene. It pulls together authors, poets, readers, a real mix. Its importance isn't just like putting on events. It's more about being this central place for people to engage with books and ideas in the city, a celebration.
And it's hosted some seriously impressive names over the years, hasn't it? I was glancing through some past lineups mentioned in the articles, people like Val McDermid, David Nichols, even Nicola Sturgeon when she was first minister, right? That kind of pull must mean something.
Oh, absolutely. The sources definitely highlight that. It shows its standing, its reputation. It acts as this vital platform,
Yeah.
giving big international names and emerging Scottish writers a chance to connect directly with readers.
But then earlier this year, poof, it seemed like it was gone. The festival was canceled. What did the sources tell us happened there?
Yeah, that was a real shock announcement in early 2024. The main reason, cited in pretty much every report, was funding, specifically a crucial funding application to Creative Scotland. That's the national arts body. It wasn't successful. One article quoted the organizers saying it was a situation they just could not navigate without that money.
Right. And the reaction to that news, it felt like it went far and wide almost instantly.
It really did. The sources paint a picture of, well, widespread disappointment, even anger, I'd say.
Yeah.
Criticism from authors, from the public. It wasn't just a few murmurs, it was loud. And that reaction itself, it kind of proved how important the festival was to people.
Yeah, I remember seeing that. Authors like Douglas Stewart, Val McDermid, they were very vocal, weren't they? On social media, in interviews, the articles covered.
Exactly. Their statements, coming from such well-known figures, really amplified the feeling. Val McDermid was quoted calling it devastating news. She talked about how important it was for both readers and writers. And Douglas Stewart, I think he called it another loss to the arts in Scotland. These weren't just polite noises, They clearly felt something vital was being lost.
Okay, so things looked pretty bleak. But then the story takes a twist, doesn't it? A really positive one, reported across the board. A lifeline appeared.
It did. And this is where philanthropy comes into the picture in a big way. The Colin Weir Charitable Foundation stepped forward. They announced this really significant donation, £65,000.
Wow. Okay, and what did that £65,000 allow them to do immediately? Because the main festival was still off for 2024, right?
Right, yeah. That amount wasn't going to suddenly bring back the full multi-week festival on such short notice. It just wasn't feasible. But what it did do, according to the sources, was give Glasgow Life, they're the ones who run the festival, the means to pivot. They could plan a series of, like, pop-up I-Rate events later in 2024, kind of keep the spirit alive. And maybe even more importantly, that money, plus the sheer goodwill it generated, it paved the way for them to commit to bringing the full festival back in 2025.
That's fascinating. That dynamic between public funding falling short and private philanthropy stepping in. Did the sources comment much on that?
They did. It really highlighted, on the one hand, maybe how precarious arts funding can be these days. But on the other hand, it showed just how much value private foundations or individuals can place on these cultural institutions. Enough to step in quite dramatically.
Yeah, it became a very visible example of how crucial that kind of external support can be, especially when budgets are tight.
Definitely. These events often operate on really thin margins.
So let's look forward then. The big return is slated for November 2025. What are the sources suggesting we can expect? What are they aiming for?
Well, the full program isn't out yet, obviously. But based on the announcements covered in the articles, the goal is very much to bring back that diverse mix I Write is known for. So you can pretty much bank on the return of things like, author talks fiction, nonfiction, the works, panel discussions diving into current issues, maybe some practical workshops for aspiring writers too, those popular elements.
And presumably that mix of authors, big established names alongside maybe some newer Scottish voices, that seems to be their trademark?
Yeah, I think that's a safe bet. That's always been a strength, historically,
Yeah.
giving a platform to both.
Mm.
And the sources consistently praise iWrite's commitment to being inclusive and really engaging the whole community. That seems absolutely central to the plan for the comeback.
Let's zoom out a bit then. What does this whole saga, the cancellation, the fight, the return, what does it signify for Glasgow and maybe for Scotland's literary scene more broadly? What's the bigger picture here?
I think it's definitely more than just getting an event back on the calendar. The sources frame it as a real rejuvenation, especially after that worrying gap. Festivals like iWrite, they're like ecosystems, really. They don't just sell books or host talks. They actively encourage reading, they inspire new writing. They also provide those crucial spaces for networking, for conversations that might not happen otherwise.
And they build community, right?
Yep.
That shared experience.
Exactly. They spark dialogue, sometimes debate, like we'll maybe talk about later. They build this shared appreciation for stories, for ideas. One report made a really good point, actually, that in a world that feels increasingly online and fragmented, these physical places where people gather around books, they offer something quite special, quite valuable.
So, connecting that back to you, listening, why does the return of a book festival in Glasgow matter, whether you live nearby or not?
Well, I think this whole story, documented in these sources, it really throws a spotlight on the fight for our cultural spaces.
Hmm.
It shows what can happen when they're under threat, but also the lengths people, authors, the public, funders will go to save them.
Hmm.
It really underlines that actually people deeply value having access to literature, to ideas, and to the community that grows around them.
Hmm. And it raises that ongoing question, doesn't it, about how we fund the arts, the perceived value versus maybe the funding allocated, and what happens when that gap becomes visible.
Absolutely. Now, I know we both probably have memories of past iWrite festivals. Do you have one that particularly stands out that kind of captures its essence,
Yeah.
some of the sources might allude to? I do, actually. I remember going to a session with the author Lionel Shriver. This must have been a few years back now, before the cancellation. And what really stuck with me wasn't just her talk, which was great, but the Q&A afterward. There wasn't just polite questions. It properly kicked off. A really robust, quite lively debate sprang up among the audience members themselves, sparked by the themes in her book.
Oh, wow, yeah. Her work can definitely do that. It provokes strong feeling.
It really does. And the energy in that room was just palpable. It wasn't passive. And for me, that captured I Write perfectly. It wasn't just author on stage, audience listening. It was a catalyst. It could genuinely engage and challenge people, get them talking to each other. That atmosphere, the sources mention it, was real.
That's such a great example of what gets lost when these things disappear. That unique energy of a live, shared experience around ideas. So when we look back at this whole journey that the sources lay out, the shock cancellation, the public outcry, that vital donation, the planned return, what's the main takeaway for you? What does it all boil down to?
I think ultimately the return of I Write is just a powerful testament to resilience. Not just of the festival itself, but resilience of the wider arts community and the audience, the people who champion it. Despite that huge setback, losing that core public funding, the collective response was massive. From authors speaking out, the public demanding action, right through to that crucial foundation stepping in. It just highlights how deeply people do value literature and these kinds of cultural events. The sources really underline that this wasn't just bound to happen. It was a fight, and it was won through real, determined support.
Yeah, it really shows these cultural anchors are cherished, and when they're threatened, people will mobilize. They won't just let them drift away.
Well, thank you so much for digging through all these sources with me and sharing your insights. It's been fascinating to trace this story of, well, resilience and revival.
My pleasure. It's an important one. And thank you for joining us for this deep dive. As we finish up, here's something maybe to chew on, building on what we've discussed from the sources. iWrite's comeback was ultimately secured by a large private donation after public funding fell through. Does this success story perhaps signal a sustainable path forward for arts funding? Or does it maybe highlight a more worrying trend where the survival of vital cultural spaces increasingly hinges on the generosity of a few wealthy donors rather than reliable public investment for everyone? Definitely something to think about. We hope this look at iWrite's journey from crisis back to celebration has given you some food for thought. Until next time, keep reading, keep asking questions, and keep exploring the stories shaping our world. Thank you for watching Westferry Times.